Thank you everyone for staying tuned with us. We now move on to the next panel discussion on medical technologies, the next big opportunity for India. I welcome Ms. Ekta Batra, anchor and deputy editor, CNBC TV 18, to kick off the discussion.
Well, thank you very much for that. We have a huge number of panelists today who have in-depth knowledge about the medical devices industry. But I just wanted to give a little brief before we start about the medical devices industry. Now, remember that COVID-19 actually has increased the focus on the medical technology industry. The COVID-19 pandemic has allowed for rapid investment and innovation into medical devices that was initially and especially for the medical consumables industry, things such as masks, PPEs. We saw a flourish and we saw a huge reduction in prices because a lot of Indian companies really came to the forefront when it came to production. Now, new products were introduced in a short period of time, allowing medical technology companies as well as India to realize its potential as well as the possibility of India becoming self-sufficient. So the pandemic also realized or made us realize the importance of local manufacturing, local supply chains, and self-reliance. Now, the hope is that this ability displayed during COVID-19, along with government-sponsored schemes such as the PLI scheme for medical devices, will help us reduce that 70 to 80% reliance that we have in terms of imports of medical devices currently, especially for high-tech devices as opposed to medical consumables. So overall, the response to COVID-19 showed India's potential and provides the opportunity to make structural changes to India's health policy and regulations in order to reduce the dependence that we have on medical devices. The government can focus, for example, by encouraging things such as R&D and to create an ecosystem where India can flourish like we have in the generic industry when it comes to drugs. So we will kick off this panel. We don't have Ms. Aparna, who was joining in from the government, but we do have Dr. Iswara Reddy, who's the Joint Drugs Controller. So I am going to start off this conversation with the government representative here. Dr. Reddy, thank you very much for joining in. If you could just start by telling us about this PLI scheme. Now we've got around 700 crores plus in terms of interest which has come in or investment for these 9 medical devices in terms of the PLI scheme. Can you just tell us what is the kind of interest that we've seen for medical devices in this PLI scheme?
Thank you, Ekta. First of all, let me thank BioAsia organizers for inviting the regulator as a part of this medical device technology. The next big opportunities for India. As you said in your introduction, Ekta, India, we are heavily depending on majority of medical devices, especially the high-tech medical devices like medical equipments, medical instruments, and so on. To reduce the import burden, the government of India has decided to promote indigenous manufacturing of medical devices. To encourage the medical device industry, the government has launched 2 medical device schemes. One is the production linked incentive scheme, and another is to set up the medical device parks. The government is already announced this scheme, and there is a very good response from the industry, and there are very good number of applications have been received, and most of them applications have been processed. And industry has also shown a lot of interest for the investment in critical areas. But at present, in the first medical device PLI scheme, they have identified certain categories of 4 categories of medical devices. That list is available in the website of the Department of Pharmaceuticals, and very detailed guidelines have been designed for this. And there's a good number, amount of investment also is coming up with this. The main salient features of this scheme is government is going to provide 5% of incentive on the incremental sales made by the manufacturer in a particular year. And also the incremental sales from year to year, they have made some specific mandatory minimum sale value. Accordingly, the manufacturer will avail the incentive from the government.
Hmm.
The second scheme is to establish the medical device parks. I think the 4 parks are going to come up. With more than 16 states. I'm happy to inform you more than 16 states have made application, and all states are very serious to set up the medical device parks in India. And the government is in the process of finalizing the scrutiny of the applications received from the various state governments. I am sure in the couple of days, the government will announce the states who are selected, identified to set up the medical device parks in India. Thank you, Ekta. Over to you.
Dr. Reddy, I just want to take that point forward because you said there's an incentive of 5%. But if you look at it, the incentive for drugs and pharmaceuticals in terms of the PLI scheme has been much more, as well as the investment when it comes to parks. Medical devices is, I think, around 100 crores. For other PLIs in the pharmaceutical healthcare space, it's much more. So, is this just being treated as just a start when it comes to medical devices, or maybe the poorer cousin at this point?
Yes, Ekta, your statistical figures are correct. In case of pharmaceuticals, the total incentive, because pharmaceutical industry, Ekta is a much bigger industry, and it is almost 42 US billion dollars industry at present in India. And whereas medical device industry is somewhere around 7 to 8 billion dollars of the market, and government generally provide the incentives based upon the market size, potential, and the immediate need, for the requirement of the country. If you see, almost 42,000 crores worth of APIs, chemicals, and are imported into India. So the government has to first identify the priority sectors, priority products. So pharmaceuticals, yes, I agree with you. In case of pharmaceuticals for the PLI scheme, the incentive ranges from 10 to 20%. In case of fermentation products, it is a 20% on the sales. The manufacturer will get incentive for 5 years. And in case of chemically synthesized products, it is 10%. Whereas in case of medical devices, the incentive is 5% on the total sales. But for this purpose, actually, Ekta, the government was constituted one technical committee to suggest the government the amount of the percentage of incentives to be given. I'm sure that this 5% government has come up with the 5% based upon the technical committee recommendations. And the technical committee was consisting of, I think, all the industry manufacturers associations as well as the experts. And based upon that recommendation, the government has gone for the 5%. The other committee which was set up for the pharmaceuticals, that committee is recommended for 10 and 20% for pharmaceuticals. Accordingly, government has agreed for the recommendation. Similarly, for parks, I agree with you. In case of bulk drug parks, the central government is going to give incentive up to the 1,000 crore. But whereas in medical device, it is 100 crores. But this is a beginning, somewhere government has started. But I'm sure in the coming days, definitely medical devices in sector also government will provide more incentives, and also they will give more support to the parks to come up in India. Thank
Okay.
you, Ekta.
I'm definitely going to get to industry, and we did see Dr. Subramaniam smile a little bit when medical devices was called the poorer cousin. So I'm just going to get to him in just a bit. But Mr. Ranjan, I wanted your thoughts before, because Telangana is coming up with a medical devices park. It's around 1,200 crores in terms of investment. Can you just tell us how much interest have you seen there? And what is it primarily going to be focused on? We do understand that SMT is also a big part of that.
Yes, Ekta. So, while the national government has realized the value of medical devices and substituting imports with domestic production now, we have been ahead in the curve. In fact, the medical devices park in the outskirts of Hyderabad began in 2017 itself. We realized that while Hyderabad has a fairly rich and a fairly comprehensive life sciences ecosystem, something was missing, and that missing bit was on medical devices. While we were doing exceedingly well in, let us say, bulk drugs, formulations, generics, and vaccines, biotech R&D, etc., we realized that the completion to the life sciences ecosystem will come if we start focusing on med devices as well. And there are a number of things which we have done since then. One, of course, we know that while we are not kind of openly admitting it, we know that the bulk of imports used to come from China. And we have done a deep study on what is it that manufacturers get in China, which can be offered to them at an alternative location in India, in Hyderabad. So one, of course, is scale. In China, if you look at the med devices park, these are large parks. And what we have attempted in Hyderabad also is to create that scale. So the medical devices park in Sultanpur, that is the precise location, spans about 250 acres with the potential of adding more to it as demand grows. Similarly, what is very important in China is backward integration and quality supply chain. We realize that companies go there because they are able to source every component, every product, not just manufacturing, but even R&D happens very easily and seamlessly there. So we have tried to recreate that, and we have hoped that we are able to offer research facilities, engineering and medical talent, and connect between the research and the manufacturing ecosystem. So the initial response has been very, very encouraging. While the PLI system scheme has been introduced now, and of course it is very welcome if we are able to provide these kind of incentives. But the fact is that over the last 3 years, 40 companies have already signed up. And you are very correct in identifying SMT. We feel very proud of their association with the medical devices park. In fact, they are the anchor client in that park, and they are creating something which will make all of us in the country proud. They are setting up a stent manufacturing facility, which will be the largest stent manufacturing facility anywhere in Asia once it is up and running. It should have been up and running by now, but there has been a little bit of setback due to this pandemic and lockdown. But I guess Mr. Bhargav will speak about it. In a few months from now, they'll be up and running. So other than them also, there are 39 other companies, and 1,200 crores worth of investments have been committed. Close to 6,500 jobs will be created. And the product line is very eclectic. It is not just consumables. I do admit that some companies who have taken space in the med devices park are going to focus on consumables. But there are many others like SMT who are going to focus on, let us say, catheters, orthopedic implants, ophthalmic medical devices, ultrasound scanners, dental implants, prosthetics, lots of 3D printed stuff which is going there, including implants and so on and so forth. Another very important player, while, as I said, we feel proud of SMT, which have also embellished our Hyderabad landscape, is Medtronic. Medtronic, as you know, is one of the premier med devices companies, and they are also going to set up a huge R&D facility in Hyderabad. They have announced their investment of over 1,000 crore, 1,200 crores to be precise, which also will be materializing in months to come. So we feel that we have stayed ahead of curve. And while I endorse what Dr. Ishwar Reddy said, but our state has always had some issues with the way in which they are looking at the locations for these 4 med devices park in the country. Our feeling is that the challenge method is nothing but a race to the bottom. If someone says that I will give land to you free, utilities to you free of cost, they may win that challenge. But what is more important is, do they have the scale? Do they have this backward integration? Do they have a very good quality supply chain? If those things are missing, and if you're trying to woo companies just on the basis of land prices and utility prices, I'm afraid that we will just not be able to give a strong match to what companies are used to getting in China and elsewhere. And PLI scheme perhaps may not really serve the objective that it is meant to serve.
Okay, all right. So let's actually see if companies are investing in the PLI scheme or not. Mr. Subramaniam, Dr. Subramaniam, let's start with you. What is your company looking at the PLI scheme? Are you interested? If you're not interested, what is the key bottleneck?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ekta. And this is a great question and a very timely one. First of all, I've got to say thank you so much for putting this panel together. Because one of the observations that I have, having been in the medical device industry now for a few years, is the way in which we have been working very closely with the government. And I've had the privilege of working closely with Dr. Reddy, Ishwara Reddy, for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's always been about providing solutions that work for the overall country, that also helps the medtech industry. You also called us out as the poor cousins, and the poor cousins also implies hungry. So we are hungry. We are hungry to grow, and we are hungry to be more relevant in this space. And of course, COVID has shone a light on the gaps and the opportunities that medical devices provide in India. So taking that into account, Wipro GE has been present in India for 30 years, 30 plus years, and has got a very robust presence. We do a lot of manufacturing here already. We have 3 plants. We do technology development, R&D, and we were also initially involved in developing products for India and for the world. The concept of frugal innovation came from us. So there's a very deep history associated with India. And although GE is a multinational company, so is Wipro, and together we have a very strong presence here and a commitment towards the country and self-reliance in medical devices. I do want to call out, though, that we are part of a global ecosystem. No matter which company we are, we do rely on each other for technology. We rely on each other for supply chains. So while we do plant a flag here and say that we are developing a plant or manufacturing site or an R&D site, we need to acknowledge that we need to be open and reliant on each other, and that, I think, makes us stronger, helps us push the boundary a little bit on technology and the quality of products and the competitiveness of products, which will eventually help us with even affordability and access. Now, to answer your question, yes, PLI has been very important for us. We have submitted our application, and we were delighted to know that we saw the announcement on the website that Wipro GE Healthcare has been selected for the PLI scheme, and we will be setting up a plant for a couple of different product areas. It includes CT scans, it includes cardiac cath labs. I'm in the presence of luminaries in the cardiac space. Madan's company is doing some amazing work in the cardiac space. So we're continuing to add a little bandwidth to cardiac products within India. We'll also be working on some critical care products as well as ultrasound. So we have a whole portfolio of products that we are going to be localizing. That is very much part of our global mandate to make the products more affordable and accessible to our population in India, utilizing the strengths of our global R&D skill, and eventually be able to export from here as well. We are already exporting actively, and we will continue to use this platform to export.
All right. So you're investing in terms of the PLI scheme. Can I just know the amount that you'd be investing?
Certainly, Ekta. We're in the region of about a little over 100 crores is what we will be investing in PLI.
Okay. Mr. Krishnan, what about you? Are you setting up a plant under the PLI scheme? Are you part of that over 700 crores investment approved?
No, as Medtronic, hi, thank you. Thank you, Ekta, and hi to all the eminent panelists. So Medtronic, we go by the principle of that, what is the core competency that the ecosystem in India has to offer right now? And we believe that R&D, the qualified STEM graduates, science technology graduates are of world class, clearly. So we believe that R&D, we already have 2 R&D centers in India. One was in Hyderabad and the other one in Bangalore, looking after renal, key breakthrough renal dialysis research into minimally, consumption of water and environmental related aspects. But the Hyderabad center, first of all, it proved within our own system that it's a center of excellence with its patents and its publications, and the value add and the quality created a good credibility within the system. So we decided, and I should thank Jayesh Ranjanji and the other, the minister KTR and Shakti Nagapan and the whole ecosystem in Telangana to support this. We found them to be extremely focused, working together with a great understanding of the sector and the industry. So we worked together, we got the commitment, worked clearly close to 2 years to get the commitment to create the world's largest R&D facility outside the US in Hyderabad. It's a 1,200 crore investment, and it's not just words. We have already executed hopefully I don't want to take the thunder away, but the inauguration would happen anytime within the next 3-4 weeks. So we are excited to open up the state-of-the-art facility. And one thing is clear, once we create a world-leading facility like that, It's not 1,200 crores. The center of gravity will shift from an R&D perspective, and more of our divisions, large divisions, would want to come and do R&D here. So I think that is what we believe is where we have the core competence. But from an investment, I'm still working to articulate, and Minister KTR and Dr. J. Sanjan and others we should thank, because they are also supporting us in the pitch to the corporate. Other states are also keenly interested. But the challenge is right now, the market is, we have 16% of the global population in India. But the global revenue share from India for the large transnational corporations is almost a percentage only. So we have to articulate, my question would be, in India for the world, we have to articulate a strategy, just like R&D, where we are creating a centers of excellence for the world from India, leveraging our core capability. In production also, how can we attract ancillary and other organizations? How can we start making in India for the world? And for that, we also need certain policy support. You know, this PLI scheme has to be much more ongoing rather than a window of 3 or 6 months. It should be there for years. And anyone who's interested, because as you can imagine, a large company like whether it's, I'm happy that GE did it, but Medtronic or other companies, the decision-making process can take 2 years to decide on a location, company which is present in 160 countries. So I would say we are committed to Atmanirbhar Bharat. So R&D was our own way of taking this investment further together to create a powerhouse in R&D. But we are keenly also exploring other areas of collaboration, and we would expect the continued support from Government of India. Government of Telangana has also been exceptionally supportive, and we hope to invest even more in India in the coming years.
So you are investing in Telangana, but right now you haven't applied for the center-focused PLI scheme. Is that correct?
Yeah, PLI scheme, we have not applied as of now, but I'm still working with the global teams to see how I can excite them about India. Now, couple of factors.
What will change your mind? What's the one thing that will change your mind?
I would say the size of the market, reimbursement policies have to improve. I can give one example. The CGHS, the central government reimbursement, has not changed for the last 7 years or so. What it leads is, this frugal in everything is not good. But what happens is that reuse of products happens like anything. In cardiology, where cardiac surgery, let's say some of our products are reused 30 times. In, let's say, renal space, dialyzers are used 7, 8, 9 times. And the incidence of hepatitis B in India among that population is almost 3x of the global. That's what one study I saw. So what happens is, we need to bring our reimbursement coverages to more acceptable levels, which will not lead to reuse of the product and very poor behavior in delivery, which will have bad outcomes. So that the size of the market becomes bigger. We all have an opportunity to play and invest in India, and then India can become also a strong share in terms of global volume of medical devices, correct? Then the attraction of global companies will increase into India.
Okay. All right. So that point is taken, that maybe that reimbursement which takes place or refurbishment of medical devices is something that which needs to probably reduce. But Mr. Vazirani, what is your thought in terms of the PLI scheme? Are you investing? Have you invested in the Telangana Medical Devices Park? Are you looking at the Center Focus PLI scheme? If you are, what are you? How much are you looking to invest? If you're not, what will change your mind?
No, we would love to invest. I think we have to look at India from not just the market today. I think we have to think beyond. And also, I believe that the goal of Atmanirbhar Bharat is good, but it's very limited. That's why I must congratulate Mr. Jayesh Ranjan and others for keeping a very appropriate theme of this session, which is accelerating the journey from importers to large-scale exporters. We must focus on the global markets. If you're thinking only about India market, sorry, it's not going to work. We should look at the global market, how India can be the factory to the world. I don't know if you know, the global market for medical devices is almost $500 billion. That's $500 billion. That's a huge market. Why can't India aim at achieving, let's say, 20% of this global market with all India's strengths, with India's fantastic trained manpower, qualified manpower, infrastructure. It's not ambitious at all to expect that in, let's say, 5 years or 7 years, India should have a plan to achieve 20% of the global market for medical devices, which today is 500 billion. I'm sure 5-7 years it will become like $1 trillion market. I mean, that's something big. So this is where I feel that we need to think big. We cannot just think at today's market and they say, let's be Atmanirbhar. That's too small an aim. So accordingly, the PLI has to fit in the bigger vision. If you plan for, let's say, 20% of the global market, that's $100 billion. That's 7 lakh crore rupees of exports. Can you believe that? That can totally transform the landscape of, Indian industry, medical devices. And as I say, there's nothing to say that we cannot do it. There's nothing to prevent us if we decide to do it. So let's go for 100 billion exports a year from India in 5 years or 7 years, and work backwards. What do we need to do for that? The current PLI is wonderful. It's a good beginning, but again, I'm afraid too small. What we need is 10 times bigger PLI scheme. We are talking about just few hundred crores. There's no way we can become a global player with this kind of PLI. Of course, the government says that, sorry, we don't have enough money. So I must tell you here what China did. I think there are some things, China is not good for everything, but some things we can learn from them. What China did is they put import duty on the medical devices, and whatever money they got from the import duty, they gave it for something like PLI, subsidy for that. I thought that was very clever. Government didn't have to spend 1 cent from their own. They charged 10% import duty and gave the 10% duty as PLI. So imagine what a big boost manufacturing can get if 10% of imports can be given to as PLI to build the future. You have to, somewhere in the industry will say, well, 10% is too much of a pain. So guys, 10% is not a big thing. And you have to take some pain today to gain future. If you want to build India as a factory of the world, you have to do some sacrifice today.
Yeah.
10% is very normal. It's not a big thing. So take 10% from imports, give that 10% as PLI to anybody who wants to set up an export-oriented factory. And I'm sure in 5 to 7 years, India can really become a factory of the world with exports of 5 lakh crores, 7 lakh crores.
Okay, well, that's definitely very aspirational, Mr. Kotadia. You've managed, or SMT has managed to break into the stents market when it comes to exports as well. What have y'all done differently, or what is the one thing that you'd like to probably change in order to grow the export market for the medical devices industry?
Thanks very much, Ekta, and a warm hello to all my fellow panelists. Before I can speak of export, I would like to, in fact, emphasize on the fact that the journey starts at home. So before we started our focus or heavy investments on the export side, in fact, India was our center of focus. And us as a company and us as the Indian segment of the industry, of the stent industry, I'm happy to announce that, in fact, today, stent is not an import-dependent sector. While medical device at large, we are still, asking ourselves the question that how do we go from an import dependency to an independence? The Indian manufacturers today contribute to almost 60% of the market share, if not more. And this has happened because of companies like SMT, like I said, first focusing on how do we grow and how do we strengthen our home base. Because before we can talk about penetrating or conquering foreign lands, it's really important that you have the strength in your home market itself. Further to that, in line to your questions on the PLI scheme, the overall medical devices parks, and echoing some of the points that even Mr. Madan Krishnan made, it's not just in order to strengthen an industry, we cannot just look at supply side. We have to look at all three components: development, manufacturing, and the demand for the products. And in that context, I'm actually really happy and encouraged by the kind of efforts being made both by the central government, but as well as independently by the state government. So in Telangana, we have the Ayurveda reimbursement scheme. At the center, of course, now we have the landmark Ayushman Bharat. Scheme like these are really, really important. Yes, again, I concur with Mr. Krishnan that some of the rates, the reimbursement rates certainly can be better, and that certainly allows us to make more aggressive investments. But at the same time, I do want to applaud both the state and the central governments for taking such aggressive steps. Ayushman Bharat, 500 million people covered, single-handedly. I mean, this is a landmark event, right? Nowhere in the world can you see this kind of volume, and certainly as we have more and more people being covered under these schemes, we can continue to see the fact that utilization of healthcare services, and as a byproduct of that, devices and pharma products will continue to increase. This is how I see kind of the Indian market growing from the today's $7 to $8 billion towards that $100 billion that Mr. Vajrani alluded to. Now coming to finally back to your question about export markets. For a product like stent, we largely export towards more of the developed economies, whether it's Western Europe and Latin America, some of the, again, more developed countries in the Asian Pacific. There, it's not just important that you bring cost advantages, right? So schemes like PLI schemes or the park certainly help us go a long way in terms of making our products more affordable and being able to export them to the world. But quality is of the utmost importance, especially when we're talking about the more complex devices, class 3 medical devices like stents. So what my urge to both the governments and my fellow companies in India will be that, as you look towards export markets and as we ask ourselves, how do we really tap into the large already developed markets like US, China, Japan, Western Europe, we need to have specific schemes and incentive policies that enable small startups or SME companies to be able to do the investments in R&D and regulatory areas required, which tend to be enormously expensive. In fact, they tend to be, as you get closer to class 3 medical devices, the investments in R&D and regulatory tend to be even more expensive than your manufacturing facilities. And any and all incentive policies that we create right now are not capturing this component, which is a big, big gap. So I think for a company like SMT, we've been hard at work for the last 20 years. We've raised a lot of capital from private investors and others as well. And that's what's allowed us to funnel or make these investments into the foreign regulatory bodies. But if we're talking about a country at large and the industry at large, if we're talking about a strong and thriving ecosystem of manufacturers who may or may not have access to the kind of capital that SMT was able to raise, I think strong support mechanisms from the government side may be required to this extent.
Okay. That point is taken definitely, Mr. Kotaria, in terms of R&D, and I'm going to come back about that ecosystem about R&D. But Mr. Nath, I wanted your thoughts with regards to this entire issue of refurbishment of medical devices. The fact that there is not much of a duty when it comes to refurbished medical equipment which is used in India. And the point that it could probably also result in incremental amount of, infections and diseases, etc. Can you tell us how pressing an issue this is, and what would you urge the government to do in this case?
Thanks, Ekta. And definitely, this is one of the very key strategic issues that's been troubling the industry. India does not allow the import of second-hand cars. We did not allow Apple to come in as a second-hand phone, and Foxconn and Apple were told clearly to put up factories in India to make brand new phones. And when a large player like them starts making, they start feeling the pain of what's made in India, and then they share the pain of the other Indian entrepreneurs, and then start talking to the government in what's really required to make the product in the country for the global market. So when Apple is made in the country, it's not made for India, it's made for the world. Now in India, when we are allowing ventilators to come in as pre-owned products or ultrasound machines or MRI machines, the issue is patient safety is compromised, calibration is questionable. You don't have regulations currently which are keeping a check on that. So until we've got robust regulations, we should
strictly disallow the import of anything which is pre-owned, and the country already had a circular which is not being enforced that did not permit the import of anything which is more than 4-year old electronic equipment, so that India would not be treated as a e-waste dumping site, which is many times the case. So this is definitely an area where we find manufacturers finding it very difficult and challenging to make a product and compete with new products coming in and try to be competitive with the custom duties, which are very low. Out of the 148 HS codes which cover medical devices, more than 20 of them have 0% custom duty. So whether it's a new product or a second-hand pre-owned product, with a 0% custom duty, try to start making that and try to be globally competitive when you have to import most of the components also. So it's a chicken and egg story where you find that you do need some duty protection, not too much, but allow what's been done for the mobile phone industry and what's been done for the consumer electronics. That's allowed those industries to thrive in the country, say at 10 to 15% initially, and then going up to 20%. Then allow the components to go up from 5%, from 2.5% to 5%, and then on to 7.5% in a phased manufacturing plan. That will motivate people to start making those components in the country. And like Mr. Krishnan mentioned over here, we don't have to think really about just import substitution. We do really need to be talking about being globally competitive. Countries which are small like Denmark, Switzerland, Ireland, Korea, Taiwan, they don't have a large, Japan, they don't have a large domestic market. Nobody put up factories over there for the domestic market, but they were globally competitive.
Sure.
So we do need to focus on the large market internationally, using our platform in India as a base. We do recognize, thankfully, that scientists in India are good, engineers definitely are good. So a lot of R&D centers are coming up in the country. So definitely there is brain power over here. Let us not only just use the brain power in the country, let's also use not only the white collar forces, but also the blue collar forces over here. And then we can be competitive for the world.
Okay.
Thanks.
Dr. Reddy, all what we've got from the panelists is that we need more stable regulation. We need some kind of duty regulation to come through, and that India has the potential to become a net exporter or even self-sufficient when it comes to medical devices. But one key point is that there's always been this fear of price control in the medical devices space. So we heard it about stents, we know it about the kneecaps that happened in the past few years, and things went silent for some time. Until last week, where there are reports indicating that the government has asked for price information on 24 medical devices. How do you expect the entire industry to flourish if they are always worried about price controls?
Thank you, Ekta, for that question. But actually, this question supposed to be for the Department of Pharmaceuticals. I think today Secretary Madam.
Government representative, so hence I've asked.
I am the drug regulator. I can understand. Our main aim is to focus on the quality, safety, and performance of the device. We have another regulator called NPPA, now National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, which regulates the prices of the drugs, including medical devices.
In your capacity also.
Yeah, I understand that. But in this, the main objective of any government is to ensure availability, accessibility, and affordability of drugs and devices in India. So until unless these devices are affordable, then there is no any meaning of any technology or manufacturing or exports or anything. First, we have to ensure its availability to the local population, especially the needy people. In that perspective, government always first identify the essential devices which are immediately need to be made accessible and affordable to the public. If you see earlier, the government is already notified so under some price control devices like cardiac stents, even at present some of the orthopedic implants, knee implants are under the price control, which really benefited the crores of the, it is saved a lot of money to the patients. The government also in the process of identifying some other devices to regulate under the price control, mainly, to see the, it is affordability to the public, and government is not against the profitability. The mainly the way wherever the prices are abnormal and wherever government feels the price need to be regulated, the government will identify such products. But I understand Rajivnath is raised the hand, and the government is also asked the various the prices of medical device at present what they are selling, mainly just to keep a the industry should not worry about sharing the prices. Anyhow, these prices are available in the open market, and even at the sale, your GST will always in your sale order you quote your prices. If government wants the data can be procured from the any other source also.
Okay.
So
I
there should not. Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah.
Reddy, here is that how do we do business with a stress-free mind that tomorrow the government is not going to impose any sort of price restrictions on us, and it also restricts R&D to a certain extent. But we'll get to that in just a bit. Mr. Nath, you had a point to make.
Yes, Hector. Thanks for the opportunity once again. Let me make some clarifications. Point number one, when there are price controls being applied in India, they are being applied to the maximum retail price which the consumer buys. The government is currently in their regulations not applying price controls on the ex-factory price of the import and price into the country. So a manufacturer in India or a manufacturer overseas, his profits are not impacted. So we are really not worried about that. In fact, it's the other way around. We in the industry have been asking for price regulations, but of the right kind. So in this case over here, what we have been seeking is that the government needs to capture the first point of sale on which the GST is applied first time, whether it's the import landed price or the ex-factory price, and not the price to the stockist, which gets manipulated. So based on that e-bill filing and the e-invoice filing, one has an accurate data that's available. One can see what is the MRP and the multiple of the MRP on the ex-factory price or the import landed price, and wherever you find it is irrationally high, in many cases, the government will start finding it's 10 to 30 times higher. So they can bring it down, and this will help consumers. It will help also ethical manufacturers. I was just attending a webinar a few minutes back where the Secretary DOP mentioned that out of 12,000 crore rupees which the consumers were saving because of the government intervention by NPPA, 6,000 crore rupees came from the price controls on stents and orthopedic implants, nearly 50% compared to medicines and pharmaceuticals combined, just by two products. Now, when you're going to do that on nearly 6,000 medical devices, imagine the huge cost savings which the consumers will get. So, duty reduction is not the way to help consumers. Consumers need to be helped by rationalized price controls, not too much of anything is bad. So, not too low pricing, not too high pricing, because you find that an ethical manufacturer, if he wants to be competitive and launch a product with a low price, he's not able to compete with somebody who's got a higher price margin available to the hospital and to the retailer. He gets priced out.
That point is taken, and I would just request the panelists to keep their answers a little brief since we have a lot of topics to cover. But Mr. Bazirani, would that prevent you from investing in incrementally in India? Maybe the fact that one day your devices could come under price control and you could soon be making lesser margins than anticipated?
No, not at all. As Mr. Rajiv Nath says that if you have a product available but not affordable, what's the use of that? And this in a way also helps, grow the industry. I think we forget that. The price control helps the industry grow. For example, the stents, after the price control, they've grown, both in India as well as the total. So I think in a way, you can't avoid certain amount of government regulation on prices, because government has to make sure that people are able to afford what we make. So it's not at all. And I think, as Mr. Rajiv Nath says, that as long as the price control is fair in a scientific way, I believe it's a good thing.
Okay. What about you, Mr. Krishnan?
So I think what we need to understand is that we have to approach from a support and incentive for the growth of the industry, because the challenges, as Dr. Reddy also mentioned, awareness, access are even bigger challenges than affordability at this juncture. I can tell you, if I put some of our advanced pacemakers free in a box in a tier 3, tier 4 city for months or years, that will not be used. So I think before we even come to affordability, it is the awareness and the access which are much bigger issues now. When it comes to price control, there are two things I want to submit. we should also not get into a crab mentality of, pulling the other one down in some way, correct? Like the famous joke of exporting crabs from wherever, Kerala, my home state, or wherever, without any lids. Whoever tries to escape, the other one pulls it down, correct? We have to work for the holistic benefit of the country and the industry. And for that, consistency of policy is mandatory. Now, even in the stent pricing, there is always argument that, what was the real patient benefit? What was reduced as the price of the stent went up in other parts. So I think the question is, price control is not in line with market forces. Market forces and efficiency in a market-driven economy is through competition and market forces. You can certainly look at margins. The industry position has been that, you can look at trade margins and rationalize trade margins in a way that is transparent and is equitable to the players involved. You should also not keep trade margins so low that the providers are not viable. The whole ecosystem should be viable, right from a manufacturer to the surgeon or implanter to the provider, because significant investment in capital is needed to create new hospitals, and we need to incentivize that. So I think you need to have a holistic approach, give PLI support, give free capital or subsidized capital to hospital entrepreneurs, and keep the margins at a level which is reasonable. If you try to cherry pick, because I sell 15,000 SKUs in India, and I can tell you, Ekta, that not even 7, 8 or 10% of them are the ones which are Pareto or the ones which are making money. The rest of them are more service to support the people. And if there is a cherry picking on certain counts and you look at the counts and reduce the price, the attractiveness of the India market will further come down. Our profitability for major companies like us right now, I can tell you very openly, it's comparable to that of sub-Saharan Africa. So let's not make it as a lose-lose game. Be realistic and be consistent in approach, and let's not do any maverick sort of behavior. That would be my advice.
Okay, so maverick sort of behavior. But Dr. Shravan, just on that point, because when there was price control which came through for stents, the biggest companies that were hit were the MNCs, where their stents were priced much higher than what was locally available. And that resulted in, many companies such as SMT actually seeing a windfall gain. Putting on your MNC hat, do you think that deters the MNCs the most from coming into India, from setting up a lot of large-scale plans, the fact that they won't be able to sell at the price that they would like to sell?
Thank you, Ekta. It is tempting to just straight away assume that a price cap is going to make demand shoot through the roof. We have to consider the overall ecosystem. And truly, I believe this, as a clinician myself, we have to put the patient at the center of any of these decisions, right? And we need to think of the patient journey and then the overall ecosystem. Now, can price capping have an impact in making products more affordable? Mathematically, yes. If two equally good products are placed before you and one is cheaper, you will go after the cheaper one. But then, does that reduce the incentive for multinational companies to get excited about the Indian market? I think that is a question which we are all asking ourselves when we are thinking about investing here, when we're talking about R&D. And if truly the desire is to make patient outcomes better and to make products more accessible, there are many facets that we need to consider for access to a product or to a technology or to a drug, whatever it might be. There are logistical barriers to access. There are technological barriers to access. There are skill barriers to access. As Madan said, just because you put a product in the market that is available cheap, you may not have the logistical or technological or skill capabilities to make that viable. So we need to consider access from a patient standpoint. And yes, looking at pricing is a significant part of that. And I can tell you that our products in India are probably the cheapest compared to many other countries in the world. The same product would be available much cheaper in India in many segments of medical technology. So what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to achieve? Now, if you're talking about making it attractive to invest and manufacture here, certainly having some sort of a steady market-based approach would make it more attractive for us. We want to enable every player in the ecosystem to be able to benefit from this. And truly, we need to take advantage of the strengths and skills that we have in the country already, Ekta. We are very strong in digital technology. How can we marry the strength of our digital capabilities with the future needs of medical technology and patient needs? Now, I think that is a question worth looking into. We already have a lot of subsidies in place to promote technology. Let's look at that also. But having said that, yes, the pricing conversation is here to stay, and we all need to cooperate and come together and understand what is in the best interest of the country and the patients and the industry.
So should there be price control or not?
I don't think there should be price control at all. I think I hope I was clear in what I said. I don't think there is any value in having price control, but there is some need for us to come to the table, talk, and figure out if there is undue or unfair practice, or if there's profiteering where there should not be, if there's anti-competitive behavior. I think these are things that we need to address and look at and promote an open market-based economy. And we need to make a commitment as industry to make products accessible and affordable to the patients, to the healthcare systems. And here, I think the government might need to step in when we're talking about reimbursement. As Madan said right at the beginning, if there is a very strong market that drives reimbursement and competitive availability of products, I think the market will take care of itself.
Okay. Mr. Katodia, you were one of the windfall gainers of price control. So do you think that's the best way to open up the domestic market?
So I would like to address kind of a core assumption that I think is being made by the two sides. That is that the two are mutually exclusive, right? Yes, I fully agree that market access is a significant point. But to say that access comes at a cost of affordability, or affordability comes at a cost of access, I think that is a flawed assumption to begin with. We can by all means address the accessibility issue, but at the same time also address the affordability issue. See, in all of this, as we've gone before MPPA and post MPPA, especially of stents, there was a question of, okay, if we reduce the pricing or if we bring in price control, is the stent volume going to go up or not? I also look at it the other way around. After the reduction has happened, certainly there have been major, as Mr. Wazrani mentioned also, there have been major cost savings to the Indian population and the governments. And that has happened without even so much as a road bump in the kind of services and the products being provided to the Indian patient, who all of us agree are at the front and center of this entire debate. So I absolutely disagree that I think in order to afford on accessibility, we cannot talk about price. We can absolutely talk about on both. Now, coming to the price point, again, while Mr. Madan alluded to our pricing being comparable to sub-Saharan, I can also compare them to Western European countries, where I know for a fact that certain markets are paying even less than what India is paying. So again, when we talk about market dynamics or letting the market play out, each country has its own way of implementing or bringing about the equilibrium that all of us want to see in the economic model. India is not the only country that deploys its regulatory framework or its government framework to make this happen. In the Western countries or the developed countries, you have highly established and highly systematically functioning insurance companies that essentially function as a way to control and bring down the pricing. Unfortunately, in India, we still don't have that. Again, alluding to the schemes like Arogyasri and Ayushman Bharat, we're evolving those central purchasing or central bodies that can do mass negotiations with major manufacturers. But again, it's still lacking when you compare them to developed countries. So till the time those systems have been able to evolve, I strongly believe that interventions like the government's through MPPA are very much required. We can talk about the PLI schemes, and the government should give, not 100 crore, but 1,000 crore. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of fact that India is still in the developing stage. And therefore, we need to figure out the optimum way of getting to the kind of developed medical industry that we want to see. And this is going to require price controls and price cuts, especially in areas where they are being exploited.
Okay. Mr. Ranjan, have you faced any apprehensions from companies that want to invest in the medical devices park in Telangana simply because of the Drug and Cosmetics Act? Because right now it is regulated. Medical devices are regulated under the Drug and Cosmetics Act. And the fear is that they can't manufacture freely because there are some penalties and there is a possible criminal prosecution which they could face because of certain things. Give us a sense in terms of whether that has been a key deterrent, And what has the industry communicated to you for it? And what is your communication been to the government, if any?
Yes, Ekta. So I'm glad that we are using this BioAsia forum to bring different shades of opinion on the table. This is exactly the purpose of BioAsia. And I recall listening to these kind of conversations in earlier editions of BioAsia as well. So while there are other legislative barriers and challenges, let me add my 2 cents to the price control debate, which has happened in the last 20 minutes or so. And again, as I said, we have been listening to different shades of opinion. One extreme view is that everything should be heavily regulated, which apparently is the government of India's view. And the second is that there should be no regulation at all. And actually, the experience of price control in similar sectors has not been very, very promising. In fact, I recall at one point in time, Hyderabad was a very important manufacturing location for APIs also. In fact, companies like Dr. Reddy's were some of the biggest manufacturers of APIs in the country. But today we know that there is complete heavy dependence on imports for APIs. And one of the reasons I can say is the price control which was introduced in the 90s. And thereafter, other countries found it more profitable to dump their products in the country. And therefore, the local manufacturing actually went down. So I do believe that the industry's fear that something similar can happen to medical devices also is not very unfounded. And we do have good examples of targeting subsidies, reimbursements, etc., for people who are below the poverty line, who require this kind of an assistance. The Arogyashri scheme of the state government actually is a very well-targeted, well-designed scheme. All kinds of implants, etc., for people who are below poverty line is 100% reimbursed by the government. So if you want to help the people, there are other ways of helping them beyond or besides price control as well. So the point which I guess these kind of debates lead us to is the fact that any kind of policy making ought to be much more consultative. I guess that is something which we are missing right now. We must understand what the industry's expectations are, because on the one hand, if our ambition is to really promote Make in India, Atmanirbhar India kind of programs, we need to definitely have a buy-in from the industry, understand their concerns. And we in Telangana always believe that we have a role to play in advocating industry's position, which are reasonable, which are logical, and bring them to the notice of decision makers. I had hoped that the union secretary would have been here in this panel so that she could have also benefited from these versions. But nevertheless, I do hope that these voices will be effectively raised and addressed in due course of time.
Okay, sure. Mr. Reddy, then I'll pose that question about regulations to you, because it's currently under Drug and Cosmetics Act. There has been an industry requirement to change it for medical devices to have its own regulation. Is that something that is on the table from the government's, the central government side, as well as maybe some quality standards? Because maybe there is some apprehension that medical devices don't have a certain standardized quality standard at this point in India, and that could be a deterrent for exports.
Thank you, Ekta. As you said rightly, at present, medical devices are regulated and considered as a drug. Yes, this is one of the great concerns from the industry. I think I was also part of the medical device regulation since 2009. This is the issue from time to time industry is rising. Globally, the medical devices are regulated separately, and the definition of medical device is not a part of the drug definition. But unfortunately, at present, under our regulation, medical devices have been defined under the definition of a drug. But however, the government has identified this issue, and last 10 years, the government has made a lot of changes to the regulations. I think, as all of you know, in the year 2017, central government has come up with the medical device rules. So where it is clearly stated the regulatory requirements for import, manufacture, and clinical investigation for medical devices. So the rules are very clear, medical device specific, but however, the act is remained same for drugs, cosmetics, and medical devices. Earlier, central government has tried to have a separate chapter for medical devices under the existing act, and unfortunately, that was not materialized. Now the central government is seriously considering, and also it is under active consideration of the government to come up with a separate bill for medical devices. Hope so in the coming days this bill may become the act once it is placed before the parliament. So I hope government it is under the active consideration of the government.
Okay, Mr. Krishnan, talking about R&D, because that's a critical component of the entire healthcare pharmaceutical space. And what we've seen in the entire drug industry is that maybe India is putting itself on the map now when it comes to R&D, and that too nothing compared to what we've seen in terms of our developed market peers. This is after us being such stalwarts in the generic industry space. Can you give us a sense in terms of what your R&D focus is, and what do you think industry needs to do in order to encourage R&D in the medical devices space? How do we create an ecosystem? If you could keep it a little brief.
Yep. I think in essence, what we need to understand is that medical devices are different from pharma. The clock speed of innovation is much faster because of the developments in miniaturization, material sciences, battery related aspects. It's much faster cycle of development. What we believe is that our key capability is in software and operating ware. Software in the non-classical ITES terminology, but software used for devices. Most medical device companies like us are more a technology company than a medical company, because we have more semiconductors and embedded software and technology there. So I believe what we are also positioning is a core around software, which is embedded technology, operating ware, and even robotic assisted technology and artificial intelligence, because those are areas where we are deploying advanced artificial intelligence into stroke care, into robotic technology. In addition to that, project management, regulatory, which are major areas of focus. And in addition to that, we also have basic material sciences, and in areas like spine and implanted technologies, electrical related disciplines, which is again to do with the blending of material sciences into design and prototyping, design and testing of advanced products. What we are creating is not just one area. We are trying to create the center of excellence for the world very clearly. As I said, the largest single R&D center outside the USA. So the aspirations are very high. And what I'm also extremely excited is that the center is already creating global experts. Just last year, 2 of our scientists have become global fellows in Medtronic, which is like a very great accolade. So more and more of these scientists and more of our R&D people are becoming into the exalted regions of scientists. And I'm sure that with their capability, more investments will come. So we're leveraging exceptionally well. We're also working with government of Telangana to see how we can also work to customize some of the courses, because all said and done, we do have good capability of people, but the skilling and the right curriculum development is not really practically oriented. So the government of Telangana, again, we are excited about some plans to create a technology university, the triple IT there and other IITs. How do we collaborate to improve the curriculum more relevant for practical application in the industry? That's an important point to work on also.
Okay, Mr. Bazirani, how much do you invest in R&D? The last we have in terms of statistics is that medical devices R&D spend is 1.6%, and compare this to pharmaceuticals, which is around 5 to 6%. So obviously companies are apprehensive.
Well, we all know that R&D is the future. You cannot build an industry, you cannot build a company without R&D, and especially medical devices, as Madan said, that medical devices is very important. So we at Transition spend more than 10% on R&D. And are we satisfied? No. I believe we need to do a lot more. Also, we need to change our mindset. We seem to believe that Indians are good only at software. I don't think that's a right assumption at all. Of course, if you look at the number of patents, well, that supports a theory that Indians are not good at hardware development because we have so few patents developed every year. But on the other side, if you look at our space program, in our space program, India is one of the top countries in the world today. So can we say that Indians are not good at hardware development? No, it belies a total theory. So I would like to go away from the theory that Indians are good only at software. So we should do R&D in software. We do R&D of software of the medical devices, but not the hardcore. So this is something that we need to do, change our mindset. And this is where I look to government to again give it a boost by starting something like PLI. I would like to have a DLI, so development linked incentive. So develop a technology, develop a new product, innovation, and get incentive for that.
Okay.
It will not be easy. It will not be easy, but I believe this must be done if you want to safeguard our future as a country of 1.3 billion people. We must do that.
Okay. Shravan?
Ekta, I agree with what both the previous speakers said. In addition, I would say we also have an opportunity to take advantage of the startup ecosystem. We have a very robust startup ecosystem in India, whether it's for product development, hardware, software, whatever it might be. And we have to acknowledge, as companies, we may not have the wherewithal to do everything ourselves, but we need to have the openness to collaborate, and not only collaborate, but also facilitate and invite startups to work closely with us. At Wipro GE, we do that. GE has a technology center here under the brand Edison, where we open it up to startups and evaluate a good number of them every quarter and integrate some of their products and services and activities with our global R&D. So I think that's also an additional opportunity that the government may want to look at to see how they can bring more of the startups together with the large companies in the larger interest of the industry.
Okay. Mr. Kotodia, I wanted your thoughts in terms of how COVID-19 in fact changed the medical devices industry. What is the key learning you had for your company or for the medical devices space from COVID-19?
Thanks, Ekta. I think what Madan alluded to, the speed of innovation has been accelerated substantially during COVID, and I think that is a trend here to stay. Especially in if we look at medical devices or medical equipment, going through the lockdown, there are at least 5 or 6 firms that I am personally aware of that in the short span of 2 to 3 months, and to a great extent with, in fact, the help of Medtronic, these 5-6 firms around India, even during lockdown, were able to create homemade ventilators, which became a great boost and support systems to both local, state, and central governments. So this is just a very specific example, of course, but more broadly speaking, I think this kind of pace of innovation that got exemplified through the COVID crisis, we're all going to now benchmark that if a vaccine can be a really good vaccine can be developed in 12 months, if a really good ventilator can be developed in 3 months and put into supply chain manufacturing commercialization, what is it that is not possible for us, right? How can we accelerate innovation? How can we accelerate the analytics of it, the clinical trials of it? And as a company, specifically at SMT, this is the same kind of new set of benchmark that we have taken upon ourselves. While we have a very aggressive R&D budget, again, close to TransAsia with a 10% plus, I think now the conversation around speed becomes more important than ever before.
Okay, all right. That point is taken absolutely and ties in with Shravan's point about startups as well. But Mr. Nath, before we get closing comments from everybody, I wanted to get your thoughts about the medical consumable space. Yes, we are lagging when it comes to high technology medical devices, but what about consumables? Where are we? Where do you think the potential can be for India?
So in consumables, we used to be strong, and we've also undermined ourselves over there. Many manufacturers have become pseudo manufacturers. Instead of making the products on their own, they import them from China, Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, just package them, sterilize in the country, and claim them it's made by them in India. This has been acting like termites. It's been undermining our manufacturing ecosystem, and this is completely against Make in India. And you can see the MSME results. The service sector industry is growing much more faster in MSME than in the manufacturing side. So that is, I think, something which is a serious flaw in the whole issue that we need to address.
Okay.
Coming back to the basics over here, let me just briefly touch about the issues about startups and entrepreneurs, if you allow me. If a manufacturer is going to be introducing an innovative stopcock, say at 5 rupees, which is used for giving infusion, and this competition in the country is giving the same product at say 4.5, 5 rupees, if they follow the IMET guideline for price control, they'll be putting an MRP of say 5 times that, 25 rupees. When he goes physically in the market, does market research, the label on the product is going at 125 to 150 rupees for various Indian and imported brands. If he is a new entrepreneur who does not know the market well and has not been guided well, he will introduce at 25 rupees and he'll get stuck because next year he can't increase the price by more than 10% a year. So he'll not be bought by the hospitals and not by the ecosystem or the retailers. If he's a smart person like me, he will keep the price at 150 rupees and follow the market and follow the system. Then he's got equally 120 rupees available to give to the hospital and to the dealers and match his competitors' profit margin delivery and satisfy their needs. That's the only way to play in the skewed market phase. That's a sad problem in the country, that we say we want market forces to succeed, but we're not allowing low price products to succeed.
Okay, so there's some sort of artificial inflation which is taking place. That point is taken. But now closing comments, Mr. Ranjan, I'll start with you. If you could just give us a brief comment about where you see the medical devices space 5 years from now and the state's focus on national policy planning as well.
So, Ekta, as I understood by listening to other panelists, everyone is extremely bullish on this sector. And fortunately, this has become a mainstream national priority now, no longer second cousins. And also, fortunately, a few states for sure are extremely well aligned with this national priority. And I feel very proud to let everyone know once again that Telangana is one of the front runner state. But the point which I would like to make, and I would appeal to all the industry colleagues, appeal to regulators and everyone, state governments as well, it applies to us as well, that we must all aim big. I mean, while it is good to be Atmanirbhar, manufacture for India, but this is an opportunity where we can start manufacturing for the world as well. And all the impediments, all the roadblocks need to be pulled down in a consultative manner. We need to support this industry much more through scale, through backward integration, through good quality supply chains, easing the regulations, etc. And I'm sure that that day is not very far when India will become one of the leading suppliers of medical devices, quality devices and affordable devices to the world.
Okay, one question, a short answer from maybe just a yes or no from all the rest of our panelists. Dr. Reddy, I'll start with you. Do you think 5 years from now, when we have this conversation about medical devices, will India be self-sufficient? Will we not be importing 70 to 80% of our requirements?
I am sure, yes, I am very confident. Definitely, India is able to have self-sufficiency, self-reliant, self-dependent, and also will have, that makes the accessibility and availability and affordability of medical devices for all needy people.
Mr. Nath?
We are currently at 80%. We are stalling from last year. It can come down to say 50% to 40% if the 5 strategic issues that India should be correcting, like IMET has proposed. Things like custom duties, separate law, refurbished equipment imports to be blocked, to have a buy India policy, and then to have separate infrastructure for testing labs available and accessible to the Indian manufacturers.
Okay, Mr. Krishnan?
I'm confident that Atmanirbhar Bharat, we are all committed and will make it work. Already, I think that percentage has come below 70 to 69 or 68. That's what I understand recently. And I think one question we also need to ask is that how much, rather than getting fixated by that percentage, how much are we adding to the global value chain of medical devices? So consultative approach, consistency in policy, encouraging incentives, rather carrots rather than sticks, I'm sure we'll become really Atmanirbhar and a powerful force in the global medical device industry.
Okay, Mr. Katodia?
Absolutely, yes. I'm more optimistic than ever before. I think all the levers that need to be pulled between the local governments, state and central governments, I see them being pulled. Certainly a lot of work needs to be done and we'll need to go sector-wise, product-wise, but I believe we're headed towards independence in a very strong and fast way.
Okay. Dr. Subramaniam?
Ekta, I think we will be a vibrant and tech-enabled ecosystem for medical devices, part of the global landscape, and certainly very strong in India.
Okay, and and Mr. Vazirani, I'll leave the last word with you. 5 years from now, when we have this conversation, where will the medical devices industry stand?
Yeah, Ekta, I would like you to reword the question. Instead of saying that will we be more Atmanirbhar, can you ask will we be a global player?
Of course.
Will we be having 5%, 10% of the global markets? I think that should be our vision. Otherwise, if it's just Atmanirbhar and the way our current policies, I'm sorry, I'm not optimist. We might come down from 80% to 60%, but that's not going to help much. So we need a bigger vision and we need more action, which right now is absent.
Okay. All right. So we have a long list of requirements from the industry and different opinions when it comes to key issues such as price fixing as well in terms of medical devices. But the industry is optimistic that at least imports will come down in the next 5 years for medical devices, and some optimistic that we'll become completely self-sufficient as well. Thank you, gentlemen, for a very enlightening conversation. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more considering the amount of focus that is put on medical devices from the government's end as well. Thank you very much for joining in.
Thank you, Ekta.
Thank you. Thank you, Ekta.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Interesting debate, interesting panel.